Hey Andy, I don't know if you've started yet, but we can't hear you.
Okay, welcome everyone. I muted myself. Um, this is the agenda for the meeting today, and as a friendly reminder, this
Is there any sound? I couldn't hear anything.
Oh, still?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Maybe it's you, Lynn.
Okay.
It's on you, Lynn.
Can you hear us, Lynn? Oh.
Here.
Yeah, she probably disconnected then. All right, Lynn, can you hear us?
I just pinged her, so I think you can start.
Okay. All right. So this is the agenda of the day. We are going to give some updates about the releases and Mergebot and pre-summit. And then Oz and Nathan will be giving a demo on the new test framework. All right, so for the release, we have published 102 last Friday. And I believe the release notes are up as well. It has some important bug fixes around an Envoy crash and security. So for 103, we don't have a target date yet, but similar to the prior patch releases, if you find any critical bugs that needs to be fixed in 102 or even 101, feel free to add to the tracker that we have already opened on GitHub, and we will plan around a new patch release whenever is necessary. Any question about the releases? Okay. If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is Mergebot. I think Seb has done some critical work to improve the Mergebot, and I believe the merge experience should be much better now. It used to run the pre-summit and the test job multiple times before it could merge a PL, but now I think it's a lot better.
So for the update, so we use in Istio pre-summit the run after success in Tide, and so I mean when you look at the pro config, you can see like we do the Istio pre-summit, and then when Istio pre-summit succeed, we run all the end-to-end tests. And the reason we're doing that today is because we push the Docker image so they can be consumed in GKE. So we looked around to use the in-cluster registry, which would basically create a cluster in the GKE, a registry in the GKE cluster, so we can push directly to that cluster and consume those images locally. But going back to Tide, the issue was that Tide didn't support the run after success correctly. And so there was a patch made by Cole from the Kubernetes team to fix that. But I mean, the work that we did is basically investigate and understand why Tide was running in a loop. And Tide is going much better right now. And coupled with the pre-summit update, we kind of did a maintenance on the cluster where Pro is running, and made sure that we had all the right resources to run test and Docker builds. And basically, and also updated the Docker image to run the most updated version of Docker, and a bunch of optimization that we did looking at how, like day-to-day looking at the performance. We were able to basically, from the Istio pre-summit, to come from 30 minutes to 8 minutes. And all the tests are also running much faster now. So we're almost close to what CircleCI is doing now. And we're not using any caching for now. We're still looking at this. But caching is a little bit more complicated on Kubernetes. especially when like there is no shared caching. So you would have to use basically a host path, and that's kind of, brings inconsistency between builds. So we decided not to go that path. But yeah, like that's much faster now.
Okay, yeah. Specifically, this is the job we're talking about, the ECO pre-submit job. It usually take almost, over 30 minutes, and now it's less than 8 minutes. And this is the job that has to happen before all the other tests can start. So that pretty much means we cut the overall pre-submit time by at least 22 minutes in total.
That's great. Good job, guys.
And combine this along with the not having to run multiple pre-submit tests in Tide, the overall merge experience should be much better as well.
And we've been looking at it. I mean, I think nowadays nobody actually merged, since last week, nobody actually merged manually PRs, which is a good thing, which is exactly what we want. Because you don't need to. If you're GTM and approve and you get all the right approval, then you should not have to think about it.
Great. Yeah, going forward, if you see any thing odd regarding pre-submit or mergers, feel free to ping us, and we'll certainly take a look at it.
And we'll definitely revisit the in-cluster registry, such that we don't even need to send to GCR. It's definitely something that we're gonna attach to the test framework, because it's much easier for the user. You actually don't need to have a personal registry. So I mean, this is working right now. You can already use it, but maybe we'll use it in Pro as well.
Cool. Any question? Okay, if not, we are going. So Oz and Nathan, you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah, let me present here. Can you guys see that okay? Andy, I don't know if you have to stop presenting or not.
Let me stop it. Are you presenting?
I am presenting. Yeah.
Can you try representing again? Andy was the presenter.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, you can see that?
Yep.
Okay, just a quick update on where we are with the test framework. Oz and I have been hacking away in between fires for 1.0 and after, but just a quick update where we are. So just kind of like a review on what we were doing, since we haven't talked about this in a while. So testing today, obviously, it's the test code is pretty complex. Anybody that's seen the pilot end-to-end tests, there's a lot going on there, and it's also tied to Kubernetes. So we couldn't easily take those same tests and make them work on some other platform. That's going to be a big problem going forward. Running tests is hard. We have scripts to help simplify it, but even then, it's a lot of extra steps. If you ever try to do it manually from like Golang, you have like 1 million flags you got to put on the command line. It's not trivial. Tests are slow on Kubernetes, just in general. They're also flaky. That's something we want to address. And people have seen, some things don't work on Mac, some things do. So we want to kind of make that experience work on everybody's machine. So what do we want? We want to make the test code simpler, platform agnostic. Running tests locally is going to be a big win. They'll be faster. They'll be less flaky. So we also want to make tests just kind of run out of the box without having to specify flags. So that's where running locally is going to come in. We want to have a more reliable config propagation. That's been a big source of flakiness. Running tests before the config is actually propagated to all the envoys. And simplify the configuration when you are running Kubernetes. So hopefully that list of flags can kind of boil down to something very simple. So here's where we're at now. Here's an actual living, breathing test that will work either locally on or in Kubernetes. So this is kind of like a copy of some of the stuff we've been doing on pilot end-to-end tests, where we test HTTP connectivity. So you look at the first line there. It's saying that we require this one component, and we'll see in the next slide that the environment is actually broken down into a series of components. So we require the apps component, which is kind of like the pilot's little test service. So we acquire an environment, and that the environment we're given is totally driven by flags. So this test doesn't know which environment it's using. It just uses the API. Then we get each of the two services named A and B, and we get all of the HTTP endpoints for B. Take the first one, and we make a call to it from A to B, get the result, make sure it's okay. So this is actually very similar to what the code is doing in the pilot end-to-end tests today. But you can see the big advantage here is there's no Kubernetes stuff here at all. It's totally agnostic. There's no ports. There's no pushing of YAML, any of that. It's just kind of focused on business logic. So real quick, under the hood, just acquiring an environment, there's this kind of global environment that's used. Anytime you call requires or any of the framework functions, ultimately it's going to boil down into acquiring an environment or creating an environment. And obviously based on flags, it's either going to be, for now, Kubernetes or local. And each of them kind of define their own version of components. So Pilot has a Kubernetes version, a local version, Mixer as well, etc. So one of the big problems that we had in doing all this, especially for running things locally, was the pilot end-to-end tests for connectivity. Because ultimately we want app A and app B to just kind of talk, but it's a bit trickier because Pilot is assuming a lot about IP tables, redirects, and all those things, which obviously aren't going to work locally. So we actually have to kind of take the configuration Pilot's giving us and massage it a bit. Specifically, we're actually adding outbound ports so that A can talk to B. We're kind of discarding a few of the inbound listeners, doing a few other things as well. But it's actually quite a bit of work that kind of went into this to actually get this going end to end. So still a lot to do. For local, we still need to fill out MTLS. We need to have the apps integrate with Zipkin and Mixer properly. They're not doing that yet. There's also an issue I ran into running locally with multiple service versions, so we have to get that working. And we still have basically the only components we have today are Mixer, Pilot. I'm not sure if we have Galley complete yet, but so there's quite a bit of work to do there.
Yeah. So one thing to add is, as we are adding more functionality to Galley, and it is starting to become the primary way to distribute a configuration. I think one thing we're gonna try to focus on is try to get that as the front end center component in the test framework for config distribution as well. Today we are doing somewhat of an ad hoc file-based config distribution, and it has a bunch of problems, right? So that's what that we will need.
Yeah, that's config distribution is actually something I actually call out here in or just the deployment in general for Kubernetes. we're still hashing that out. So in the demo I'm about to give you, I actually, we're going to be running with an existing cluster all set up. So the components aren't actually going to deploy themselves, but that is where we're going to head into the future. All the configuration, the components themselves, all that stuff will be part of a deployment strategy for Kubernetes. Another thing to note on Kubernetes, we're really pushing hard. Sebastian mentioned it earlier about using an in-cluster Docker registry. This is just going to simplify the developer experience so that, if I've got code in front of me and I just want to run that stuff on the cluster. Well, today you got to have that kind of like manual step to, push everything to some GCR and make sure that, your hub and tag and the flags are pointing to that GCR. We're hoping to just kind of automate all that so that as a part of spinning up the test framework for Kubernetes, we're just going to create an in-cluster registry for you, push your images so that you're running with the code that's sitting in front of you, and it should all just work. One general thing is we still need to kind of come up with a story for reliable config distribution, pretty much for all the components, in particular pilot, routes, and etc. We have to make sure that we have a good story for when we propagate a config, make sure it's been distributed to all the envoys before we proceed with the test. So now just do a quick demo to show you what we got so far. So as I'd kind of shown before, I'm just going to give a quick demo of the HTTP test. So this is actually the code we're looking at right now is Pilot's end-to-end test. So this is the old code, as it were. And you'll see, there's a lot that I'm leaving out here, but basically what we're doing is we're getting all the apps, we're kind of iterating over all of their ports, and we're making calls from each service to all the ports on all the other services, all the HTTP ports. And this test actually has to hard code them, which is just an artifact of being very dependent on the particular setup we're using. But you'll also notice that when we actually go to make the request, that's a lot of Kubernetes stuff. So this test, there's no real easy way we could make this portable to other platforms like local or anything like that. So just to see what that looks like in the new world. So this is effectively the same test. And what we're doing here is this is a lot of the same code we saw in the slides. We get the environment, we get a few apps, we get their HTTP endpoints, and then for each source app, we iterate over the endpoints for all the other apps, make requests, and make sure the result is okay. So this is doing the same thing, but it's doing it in a platform agnostic kind of way. So this is a little helper method here, and what I've done is I've made 3 actual test methods to demonstrate how they can all require different things. So one of the first things you do in a test with a new framework is you indicate what you need in order for this test to run with the requires method. So they all need the apps component, but I've taken added a couple other methods here where we also require a particular environment. So this one actually requires that it runs in Kubernetes, and this one requires that it runs locally. So what we'll see is, depending on what we run with, only those methods that are configured for the environment will actually run. The others will be skipped. So I'm just going to take a look here at the configuration for running locally. You'll see I have no program arguments at all. So we're just just doing a standard Go run. So let's do that. Okay, you'll see that test HTTP, the one that was environment agnostic, and test HTTP local were the two that run. And Kubernetes was skipped because it requires the Kubernetes environment. And then likewise, if we go over to the Kube version of this, take a look at its parameters. So the main two parameters that this requires are specifying that the environment is Kubernetes and pointing to the kube config. These other namespaces are, I won't go into those, but effectively what I'm saying is we're using an existing environment that's running currently. So we're not actually going to be, as a part of this test, pushing anything out. You'll see I already have a, you'll see I already have a cluster set up on GKE. So I've already actually pushed effectively to pilot end-to-end tests, so all the services are already there. All the app pods are there and ready to go. So if I go and run this, one thing you'll notice is it takes significantly longer because for each test we're actually execing onto the pods, running the HTTP request, and then returning. So you'll see again, it ran the platform agnostic method on Kubernetes, and it also ran the Kubernetes method and it skipped the local, since it requires the local environment. So that's basically it. Moral of the story is local is way faster. Kubernetes took almost 30 seconds, whereas running locally took basically a second. And this didn't even actually deploy anything to Kubernetes. It was just using existing pods. Obviously, if we're deploying, it's going to take up quite a bit more time. Also, when we ran locally, it actually did start up a bunch of processes. You started up like 3 different envoys, pilot agents for those. All the components were actually just created from scratch. Still only took a second. So that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, hi. This is really cool. So question I have was, do I have to write the dedicated method for the local method that you just ran?
So the hope is that you'll never write anything that's platform specific at all. You would just write the HTTP one. I just had the 3 methods for basically demonstrating if you do need to make a platform-specific method, like this only runs in Kubernetes, then you can do that by specifying that you require Kubernetes in the test. But the goal is that, hopefully 70–80% of our tests are agnostic to the platform, and we can just write one method and switch platform and run all of our, a huge portion of our test suite against any platform.
Okay, that's great. And then does this work with Microsoft Studio Code? I think you're using like Golang.
Yeah, I'm using Golang. I mean, it certainly should. There's nothing Golang specific about it, so feel free to give it a whirl.
So one thing to note is we tried very hard to make it so that you can run this as Go test, using the standard Go tooling. So whatever IDE you choose, hopefully, everything should just work.
Okay, cool.
Nathan, do you want to cover the contribution part?
The contribution part? I'm sorry?
Like we're asking for contribution as well, right?
Help needed.
Yes, everybody, help. Now, please.
So in the help part, hello. So in the help part, is there in a list of things you want to try to build that is not available yet? Because I saw there is a major epics or histories, but I didn't saw like a list of functions you're trying to achieve or something. I'd like to help on that, but I'd like to understand better what is needed.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, so we do have an epic. I think that's what you're referring to. I've tried to capture in that epic all of our current tasks. But yeah, it probably could use some love and filling out more long-term vision under that epic as well. So yeah, I expect that epic to be kind of an ongoing thing that will continue to expand as we go forward. But yeah, feel free if you'd like to roll up your sleeves. Just ping any issue that looks interesting under that epic, and we'll work with you on that.
Yeah, both Nathan and I are like, I think, very open communication. So just if you guys feel like contributing, if you want to ping me or ping Nathan, I think you can just go ahead and do that on Slack, and we are happy to help. We are eager to get people's help on this. So
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I have added the link to the a link to the epic in the meeting notes, so you can go to the link and see the remaining tasks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions about the test framework or about anything else?
Yeah. So Andy, is there anything we are doing to leverage this work in pre-submit? Or do we have any plan to leverage this work?
I think.
Oh yeah, so the one big thing is that we plan to migrate most of the integration tests and end-to-end tests to this new framework, and run them in pre-submit, right? Hopefully, if they got enough coverage, we will just not retire, but remove the end-to-end test from pre-submit and just run all these tests in pre-submit.
Okay, great. So the numbers you were presenting, that was still on the old framework for the improvement of PROW to be similar as Circle.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
great. So we
Right.
could potentially see a lot more improvement.
Right. Yes.
That's
I
awesome.
think that's part of the help needed. Like we need people to migrate those test overs.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And earlier, most of the improvement was actually in the pre-submit job, which doesn't even run tests, right? It builds the images, Docker images, and push to GCR.
I see.
We did see some improvement in the end-to-end test a little bit as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we saw like 10-15% improvement in the test jobs, but like over 60-70% improvement in the pre-submit job.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you very much, and see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you. Good work
Later.
and good demo.
Okay.
Thank you.